You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game. And we will be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening because we have as our guest Professor Charles Lipson from the University of Chicago. More about him other than to know he's been teaching politics and international relations at the University of Chicago for 4 decades. He's very well credentialed. But I think what people want to know most from Professor Lipson, we're taping this on May 19th. You may see it a week or two later, so things may happen as they do every day. We want to know whether President Trump will be impeached, and if so, when. When will we know whether he won't be or will be? I don't think that's asking too much, is it, from you? You can give that answer, and then we can tell people to go off, and they don't even have to watch the rest of the show, right? It's that easy.
I've been troubled by the accusations, but I've also been troubled by how quickly people moved to talking about impeachment. Let me tell you why. Impeachment should only be done for the most serious crimes that have been where the evidence is overwhelming and conclusive. And the reason for that is that it overturns the effects of a democratic election. Now, if, as some of the more extreme Democrats are charging, the election itself was the result of a treasonous collaboration between the Trump campaign and the Russians, and we didn't get an honest result because of that, then that's something that would require impeachment. But this is far too early in the process. I'm actually quite pleased that Robert Mueller is leading this investigation, and even though I'm troubled often by the notion of a special prosecutor, the reason that I like the Mueller appointment and have written about it, I have a blog called Zip Dialogue, and I've written about why I was pleased with it. It's twofold, maybe even threefold. First, Mueller is a consummate professional. He knows the business of these investigations, and he doesn't have a political agenda as he goes into it. The second thing is, I think when Mueller comes up with a result, whatever that result is, it will convince a large number of the people on Capitol Hill and in the country that he has gotten the right people. And the third thing is that unlike Patrick Fitzgerald, who I thought was given one task, which was to find out who had outed Valerie Plame as a CIA operative, and then went on a long fishing expedition and eventually got someone unrelated to that. He found out who did the leaking quite early, never indicted that person, and then went off on a fishing expedition for a long time. My sense is that Mueller will stay fairly focused. There's several scandals here. They need a thorough investigation. He'll be able to hit the ground running. We need an honest investigation. We need one that's accepted as legitimate by the public, and it needs to be expeditious. This cannot last 8 years.
Okay, so what's your best guess? May 19th now? When will we know whether President Trump will be impeached or not? Your best guess as to the time?
Oh, I think in the next several months, we'll know if this is an investigation that's beginning to turn up things that go beyond a personal issue of corruption, which might embroil people like Manafort or Flynn, who are important figures. But if they actually involve the Trump campaign in a serious way, then Mueller will want to move quickly, because after all, you'll have a president who shouldn't be staying in office, and people should know about this.
But you said something that was interesting. Yeah. You said this is going to be a constrained, focused investigation. Democrats are already saying he's been given broad latitude to pursue broadly the area of potential collusion and more, sort of anything Russia. Republicans, Republicans like Lindsey Graham, who's often viewed as a moderate, is already talking about, well, you know, this has to be fair, and if he's looking into stuff where a president or a party has been influencing the Department of Justice, he says, Senator Graham says he knows there are emails from Democrats or the Democratic Party to the Department of Justice while Hillary was being investigated. Maybe they were leaning on DOJ not to go forward, as Trump is accused of leaning on Comey not to go forward. And he says that ought to be covered too. Should it?
I actually hope it is. If the Department of Justice was fundamentally being corrupted, or there was an attempt to corrupt them by the Democratic National Committee, I hope that will be looked into.
So you think that his charge, the charge for, is it Robert Mueller or Mueller?
I say Mueller,
Okay.
but they mean all the same
So
thing.
I
They're
say
the
tomato.
German form. They're the German form of Miller.
Okay, so I say tomato, you say tomato. Okay, so
Let's
I'm gonna
call the whole
him-
thing
I'm
off.
going to call him Mueller. You can call him Mueller. But Mueller, in your view, should get into that, even though it's sort of outside.
But it's his
the
call.
scope.
The key point
It's his call.
that both, and this is the problem when you appoint these prosecutors. There are several problems, but one is that there's really not a limit on their charge. You're really trusting in the person who's been appointed and about how wide he wants to go. My sense is that if he begins to find things that are outside of the narrow Russian investigation, he'll face the following problem. If he hands it off to the Justice Department, people will say, well, Donald Trump, who was Hillary Clinton's adversary, his Justice Department is now going after a political opponent, and that would be an awful thing, because we do not want President 45 to go after 44 or the adversary for 44, because at every point the problem that we've had in the Justice Department has been that it has been too politicized. There's a role for politicization, that is, the president and his or her appointees should have priorities, and they should be able to set priorities on what they want to look at. And President Obama, working with Eric Holder and then Loretta Lynch, will obviously have different priorities from what President Trump working with Jeff Sessions has. But we don't want to have a situation where each president comes in, politicizes the Justice Department in the way that I think President Obama and his appointees politicized the IRS. That is a terrible thing. And so I think what will happen, to bring this to an end, I think what will happen is that if Mueller begins to run across very serious problems in potential corruption that involves, that touches on his investigation, in other words, he comes across it in the normal course of his investigation, there'll be very strong incentives for him to go after it, not because he needs to nail another pelt on the wall, but because it would be very hard to hand off to the regular Department of Justice in a way that the American public would feel produces a legitimate result. I hope that's not too complex.
Well, we're going to go
Yeah.
on, but I do want to know one
Yeah.
thing. I think this shows what people often think. Republicans don't seem to know how to do government. In this case, Donald Trump is a novice. He's not a politician, although he started to call himself a politician. But he's not really. But even so, Republicans in general don't seem to know how to govern, how to do politics.
In what, I'm not,
Well, let me just
yeah,
give you the
go ahead.
example. Then this is very odd in that Trump won. He had an Attorney General Sessions. He and this Russian matter came up, and before you knew it, there was some pressure on Sessions to recuse himself from all
Right,
matters.
right.
This matter then goes to Rod Rosenstein, who's
Right.
sort of a DOJ operative, or he had worked in the Bush administration DOJ. I don't know how he got into this position. What is it, Deputy Attorney General?
He's number 2.
Was he appointed? Did he just start in the Trump administration, or was he there before?
He's really a very high level, a politically neutral appointee. He's exactly the kind of person that we need in a senior position like that.
But how did he get there? Was he there as a holdover?
No.
He was brought in
the
by-
U.S. attorney for Baltimore and
Okay.
that area.
So who brought him in to be Deputy Attorney General? Did Trump do it?
Sessions
Sessions.
and Trump.
Big time mistake. Let me just say this, okay? And then you can respond.
Yeah.
When I say they don't know how to govern the Republicans, the
Yeah.
Democrats would never be in this situation. Everybody knows you don't want an independent counsel when you're the guy who they're
Right.
investigating.
Right.
Democrats don't want it, Republicans don't want it.
Yeah,
You want
they
it for the
didn't
other
have
guy.
one on any of the
Right.
big scandals.
So,
Right.
yeah, so you mentioned IRS, you mentioned Lois Lerner, you didn't
Right.
mention Benghazi. None of those things. Nobody was talking about a special prosecutor. And Obama was saying, there's nothing there.
Right.
Isn't that like Trump leaning on Comey? Obama said it publicly because he knows how to do it. Don't say it privately, then they can't accuse you of trying to put pressure. That's what I'm saying. Obama knows how to do this because he did government. He was a state senator for 8 years. He was a U.S. senator. He was a community organizer. Trump and even the experienced Republicans, they got themselves in a situation where you have a special prosecutor. As much as you think, and maybe you're right about Mueller, you never want that.
Oh,
Going back-
absolutely.
okay, so am I
Yeah.
right on that score? If you're
Right.
president, you want somebody in the AG spot who you can respond to, who you can trust. Back to Nixon with John Mitchell, you could trace him, I'm sure, back, and Obama with Holder. You want that person there. That is the way. You say you want to take politics out of it, but you can't. The Republicans can't seem to finesse this. Now they have a special prosecutor. That's my point.
I think
Am I
you've
right?
nailed a very important point. The Democrats are generally much better at this, but let me explain why I think that's so. You were referring to Barack Obama's community organizer. Let's ask ourselves, what does that really mean? What was he organizing the community to do? He was organizing it to make demands on the government. It was not the community organizing in the sense of let's all get together and clean up the neighborhood, let's paint buildings that need painting, let's do what we would call civil society and what Tocqueville thought are the foundations of our country. He was organizing people to go out and say to the government at City Hall or in Springfield or in Washington, give us these resources, rain manna on us. The Democrats are the party of government. It's not surprising that they populated the entire bureaucracy with their people, and the kind of people who want to be there are their people.
I interject, and that's what the
Yes.
Republicans refer to as the deep state. That is throughout the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, throughout DOJ, the Department of Justice. These are their guys.
Of
Whether there's a
course.
Republican or Democrat,
Absolutely.
this is the deep state. These are the people they say, they're career prosecutors. They have no leaning. BS, okay? As good as Rosenstein might be, if you had a normal, what I call, whether it's a Democrat putting a person in the Deputy Attorney General spot, or whether it's a Republican, whoever that was, if you had the normal person, they would not appoint a special prosecutor for their party.
But there's
Rosenstein did. I'm just saying, if Trump and the Republicans had their sense about it, they'd figure out how to put somebody there. If Sessions had to recuse himself, put it in a guy who wouldn't do it. And then Trump got mad at Sessions. He said, you shouldn't have recused himself. He probably was right. Had he not recused himself, this wouldn't happen.
This is
Again,
all
Sessions doesn't know how to do politics because he's a small-time guy from a small-time state. Say what you want about him. He doesn't have the faintest idea. A good politician, similar views, would not have recused himself. Am I right?
I can
And
tell.
let me just say here, here's the point to say, the gentleman I'm speaking to has a BA, and he has a BA from Yale in economics and political science. We forgive him for that because not the University of Chicago. He has a master's and a PhD in political science from Harvard. We forgive you for that because he spent the last 40 years atoning by teaching at the University of Chicago. No, but seriously, if anybody's going to know the answer to my question just now, which I can't remember what it was, I think it would be Professor Charles Lipson. Seriously, he knows economics, he knows international, he knows politics, he knows how all of this stuff comes together. So,
Well,
am I
let me put
right
it
in
like
my
this.
thesis?
Let me
Okay.
put it like this.
Yeah.
The chances that Damir, Richard J. Daley, the person who governed the good people of the city of Chicago,
That's a great
would
imitation.
ever allow the great people of the city of Chicago to have a special prosecutor, this is totally never going to happen,
Absolutely right.
Never. The problem that the Republicans have on these issues is that they're not only facing the Democrats, they're facing NBC, ABC, CBS, the Washington Post, the New York Times, MSNBC, and who are coming at
And
them
all they
with-
got, all the
with-
Republicans have is the Fox
Fox.
News channel. And everybody always talks about the biased Fox News channel, nothing about the biased MSNBC.
Well,
Let me just interject
Yeah.
one point, because you will remember this about the
Yeah.
Clinton. It was said about the Clintons when there was somebody in the impeachment time, in bimbo eruptions, they were known, the Clinton motif was deny, delay, distract, and distort, right?
and then destroy.
And destroy. And let me see if,
Yeah.
I gotta find this on my notes so if I get this right here.
Yeah.
And because there's a guy named Brian Stelter on CNN who does reliable sources.
Oh, my
And did you know
Lord.
what he came up with? He says, this is terrible what Fox is doing. They are doing the work for the Republicans of denying, distracting, and distorting. Brian is all of 31. I guess he doesn't have the wisdom. He didn't live through. He didn't live through what I just said about the Clinton thing. He wouldn't know it. This is another problem of the media. We go to people who have who are like 31 going on 14.
Well,
So he goes on to talk about how
I
biased,
totally
how
believe-
biased, how
Yeah.
biased Fox is, and how they're just doing the Republican bidding, and he doesn't mention a thing about MSNBC or about his own network.
I think we can get into Fox. I would say that a special report with Brett Baer, which is 5 o'clock in Chicago, is the best television news report by far.
It's the
that's
only
on the
1
air.
hour of real national news, isn't it?
The first
Is there anything competing
the
with
first
it?
40 minutes,
Yeah,
the first
first
35
40 minutes,
minutes
right.
are hard news. Well done. They have really outstanding people. Catherine Herridge, for example, on intelligence issues. Jennifer Griffin on military issues. These are just first-rate people.
Who is the closest
Reuben-
competitor to that? Is there a competitor to the special report program, that 40 minutes of that hour that does what you've just described?
Yeah.
Does MSNBC, does CNN?
I don't think
anybody
of them.
have
Well, they all. I think
real news like that, not interviews.
Let me
real
go
news.
back rather to explaining what I think the political impact of this and how it leads the Republicans into the special prosecutor cul-de-sac, which is that the initial strategy, which I didn't think would hold up, but is actually increased like a kind of avalanche, is that the Democrats came in saying we're going to obstruct, we're going to delay. And
It's called the resistance, right?
Right.
They call it the resistance.
And it has burgeoned. It has lasted longer. It is still growing. And they are essentially in a position where they are as the parties move left, because essentially you've lost all the moderates for a number of reasons. Some because the South has switched. Some because under Obama, essentially a whole generation of Democratic politicians was decimated. They were thrown out of office, and
Because why? Why were they?
because Obama's was personally popular, but his policies were not.
And what was it in particular that led to the demise of so many of the Democratic Party bench?
Well, Obamacare.
Obamacare. So in 2010, that began when the Republicans took back the House, took back the Senate, right?
Right.
And you started taking back legislatures across the country, right?
Right. Republicans have basically 2/3 of the states now in Republican.
All as a large part as a result of the hostility to Obamacare.
Right.
Would that be correct?
And part of that is hostility to Obamacare. The other parts, I would say, are that the red states are the ones that are growing. They're the ones that are creating jobs. People are noticing that. To me, the oddest thing is that people flee from Connecticut and New York and New Jersey, go down to North Carolina, and then vote for the same people and policies that led them to flee those states in the first place. But that's only part of it. Part of it is that the Democrats are so in bed with the public sector unions that states are having two big problems. One, as Margaret Thatcher once said, the problem with socialism is that sooner or later you run out of other people's money. And that's exactly what's happened in states like Illinois. We have very well-funded governments. Take a state like California. It used to be that about 40 years ago, you could say, if I want to live in a state with high taxes and high services, I can live in California. If I want to live in a state with low taxes and low services, I can live in Florida or Texas. And what we see now is that California still has high taxes, but the services measured by outputs, how good are the roads, how good are the schools, those kinds of things are not any better than the low tax states. You go to Texas, you go to Florida, the roads are just as good, better. The schools are just as good, better. California still has the best system of higher education. But in general, if it wasn't for Silicon Valley, California would be Puerto Rico. I mean, it's just completely a basket case.
But the Democrats would say, if they were here, I think, notwithstanding all that you've just said,
Yeah.
Hillary got, 3 million more total votes? Was
Right.
it 3 million more votes?
Right.
Than Donald Trump, showing if this were a popular election determination, which people say if you believe in democracy,
Right.
it should be, they would say the Electoral College is an anachronism of this document, the U.S. Constitution.
Right.
Simply toss it away. Don't bother with amending it. Just toss it out. Get 5 Supreme Court justices who will do this. Toss it out. You'll have no Electoral College. You'll have more
By the
democracy.
way, that's a major
You're
reason.
you're a political scientist.
Yeah.
You've got to be in favor of democracy. So isn't Hillary right? Aren't the Democrats right? Let's let the majority of the people in this country determine what we should have. Stop having big money. That's what you're talking about here. That's what they would say. Stop Citizens United. Start having the people, power to the people. You surely remember that phrase, Professor Lipson.
I do.
What's your response?
Well, I have several, but one response is that you didn't hear Democrats talking about big money during the campaign. Why was that? Well, because they had more money. Who threw out?
They had more money than Donald Trump. He
Yes.
has $4 billion in net worth. He could
No,
have
no,
spent
I'm not
$1
talking about his net worth. I'm talking about how much money they had brought in to the campaign. They simply had more money. Who threw out the federal financing limitations
That'd be Barack Obama.
Barack
running for
Obama.
Trump.
And why did he do that? Well, he did it for a good political reason, which was he realized that he could outraise McCain. And
But
why
he
should
was
he limit
doing
himself?
justice. Anything done in the name of justice, the ends justifies the means. Surely you would agree with that.
Look, the
How am I
the
doing,
problem,
folks? I am balanced. I am playing the Democrat to a T, am I not?
the problem about the popular vote issue is not simply that you're not going to change the Constitution on this and all the rest. The problem that we really ought to focus on is not just that some people voted for Hillary and some people voted for the Donald, but rather that there is now a very deep, deep cleavage in the country. Political scientists have known for a long time that if you take a pie and you cut it once, that separates things this way. If you cut it 4 or 5 times in different ways, that's a much more stable political system. We're cutting the pie over and over and over again down the same line. And that is leading to a country where if you tell me your views on guns, or if you tell me your views on abortion, or almost any big issue, I can tell you whether you could run in one party or the other. You simply cannot run as an anti-abortion Democrat. You can't run as a pro-abortion Republican
Let me just interrupt
anymore.
to say we only have a few minutes left,
Yeah.
so let's put it to the best use. So I've squandered, my fault, too much of the time. So in the next few minutes, tell us, what, with this background of impeachment and special prosecutors and all of that
Right.
going on, what does Trump do on domestic policy and foreign policy? He got Gorsuch there, perhaps his major accomplishment, somebody he and most conservatives would say, a talented, qualified justice. Can he get what he wants in terms of tax cuts and other things to raise the economic growth in this country to 3 or 4%? Can he do that? Can he do something about immigration? Can he get repeal and replace health care actually passed? And can he do something on the foreign policy side? The floor is yours. And how does he do it?
My answer is, if he doesn't keep the economy growing and get health care reversed, the Democrats have a real shot at recapturing the House, maybe even the Senate.
Okay, so that's number one. Say he does that.
And
Say he
those
gets that.
people know that.
Okay.
And therefore, the sense that Republicans, if Republicans are beginning to realize that if they don't draw together, if they don't hang together, they'll hang separately.
So he does that.
He's got
What
to
about
become.
taxes? Does he get tax reform? Does he get tax cuts?
He's got to go for whatever parts of that he can get through. And my hunch is that those are the business tax cuts immediately that he needs to move hard.
Corporate.
Corporate.
Making the U.S. more competitive internationally.
Absolutely.
Get the economic growth rate. Get jobs. That'll cure a lot of things. What about
The
immigration?
job situation's already quite good.
So border control, the wall, drop that?
He will end up not being able to get the wall right now. It's just too controversial. But they are getting immigration enforcement. That matters.
Free trade, or will we go down, some would say, the wrong path of trade barriers? He promised trade barriers.
It's going to
Will
be
he do it?
case by case. It's going to be hard negotiations with individual partners. And I think a lot of the trade nationalism stuff will simply lead to tougher bargains in bilateral trade deals.
And some would tell you, Doug Irwin, who was on the show from Dartmouth,
Very
you know
important
Doug?
figure.
He would
Yes.
say it's multilateral agreements that lead to prosperity for the countries, not bilateral. Do you agree?
I
And will
agree.
this be a problem because we didn't
I'm
cover?
happy to do it.
But I very much want to thank our guest, Professor Charles Lipson, University of Chicago, professor of political science, has been